first of all, what does it mean to you to be vulnerable? Or what's it like when you witness people being vulnerable? What is that? How does that show up? That's one question. Then the other question is, why bother? Why be vulnerable? And what's it like as a man to be vulnerable?
That's more than one question.
That's a bunch of questions. Did you write them down?
No, it's better if you ask them one at a time.
I know, but they just kind of come rolling out of me.
Yeah. Well, I would start by looking at the word itself, vulnerable. You've taken a risk. There's a way that who you are or what you're doing can get hurt. You've taken off your armor, or there's a opening in your armor. You don't have your defenses all up. I often react to kind of the acculturated meaning of the word, where vulnerable means crying, weepy, or emotional, weak, or showing up, all a quiver. That's what people kind of map onto the word.
Yeah.
And it can look like that
Mm-hmm.
for some people, and sometimes in lots of places it includes that.
Or it can be interpreted as that when
Yeah.
it really isn't.
Yeah.
Like I think that happens between men and women, where women get more visibly emotional, and then it gets interpreted as that she's weak and needs help, and I need to step in and fix it, when what she's really just needing is to have presence and caring.
Vulnerable is needing help, and there's a lot of cultural programming about how we shouldn't need help, how we should be self-contained and strong and powerful and go get them. I think no, vulnerability is whenever you're at risk, whenever you feel at risk. Yes, it can be crying, because crying is risky in this culture, especially for men. And when I'm in a group and I am moved to tears, I'm always, oh, God, that's so hard. I get the vulnerability hangover afterwards. I
Which
wish I
is
hadn't done that.
Yeah, sense of shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not the only thing that's risky. Showing up and saying, well, this is what I think, can feel really risky.
Right.
This is what I want, can feel really risky. You risk not getting it, or people not caring, or people thinking what you want is silly or wrong or bad. Showing up in one's full power, putting themselves out there in the world, saying what you think without apology, that can all be as risky as hell, and none of it looks like crying and weeping and being weak.
Right.
But it's all vulnerable.
To just kind of clarify that,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way of saying all of that isn't vulnerable? Can that be delivered in such a way that it is the opposite of vulnerable,
Sure.
like attacking? We've kind of trained ourselves to not use, or to limit the use of, pronouncements like, this is how it is,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't invite people in.
Right.
It pushes people away, like, oh, he's got the final answer, so there's no reason for me to speak, because if I do, it will either turn into a fight, or I'll get decimated with his razor logic.
Mm-hmm.
So I just won't say anything. So then it seems like that's the opposite of vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use what's called soft language all the time in my writing, right? I add I think and to my mind and in my view, and this is my experience. All of these phrases that take away the pronouncing quality of what I'm saying, so that I'm not just declaring this is.
Right.
That's a really strong thing to do, is
Right.
to tell the full truth, that this is your experience and how it looks to you, and that you're open to it being different than that, and you don't have the whole truth about this.
Right. So it's kind of psychological jargon, but it's owning. It's saying this is just my point of view, or this is just how it is for me.
Mm-hmm.
So you own it. It doesn't move into territory where you're defining what is absolutely true and real for other people, which could be very different.
Right.
Yeah.
So language like that, to me, is honest and sane. It aligns with reality.
So
Because in the end, when you think about what can we know, we can know we're having a thought. We can know what we've seen and read. We can know I'm having a certain memory. We can know I'm having a certain feeling, but we don't have much access to the inner lives of other human beings. And we don't have much access to what's going on in the world that we don't directly participate in. So it's honest to say, this is in my experience.
right.
It's aligned with reality to say, as far as I can see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we might say that being vulnerable is telling the truth, but it's telling the whole truth. Here's what I think, but I don't know everything. Here's what I want, but I might be wrong in that wanting. I might be programmed. That might be coming out of something I'm not even aware of.
So let me ask you, when you do that, what are you being vulnerable to? Like what might happen if you tell the whole truth? You don't just say, God damn it, I need dinner ready at 6:00. If you say, oh, I'm exhausted and I'm really hungry, I wish dinner was ready. What does saying it in a vulnerable way rather than a pronouncing or aggressive way? What's the vulnerability in just saying, oh, I'm really tired and I really need things?
You may feel shame or embarrassment to need something,
To need,
to
to have
want.
needs.
To have needs. That's a pretty thick piece of programming in this culture.
Having needs, why is that risky? It's kind of obvious. Living beings have needs. Advanced living beings, or let's say more complex living beings like human beings who have, you know, thoughts and feelings and creativity and all kinds of aspects to them, would have more and different needs than animals. How did declaring that we have needs or even idiosyncrasies become risky?
Well, so the obvious answer is that classic therapeutical question. So tell me about your mother. Right?
Yes.
We were raised by people who were stressed, tired, poorly trained, raised by stressed, tired, poorly trained parents themselves, or abusive or neglectful. We were raised by people who very often, when little kids show up with needs, did not handle it well.
Right. They got angry that they were being asked for one more thing when they already felt depleted.
Right.
It gets turned around and the kid feels ashamed for needing one more thing. That's just being a kid.
And then there's all the messaging from books and cartoon shows and comic books and television shows and movies, and all of the message about strong, independent leaders, warriors, people that are in charge, people that didn't need anybody, the heroes, all of that messaging.
That a true hero doesn't need anybody. It's just there protecting.
Yeah.
Let's just play this game. What would you say to men who have trepidation about going to a workshop that might be kind of touchy-feely in some way?
I would start by saying it makes total sense to have trepidation about that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
it's kind of like at the cultural level, we're getting an experience of how emotion-led um, leadership has limits.
Can't we make room for both thoughtful, considered uh, opinion and expression of experience and, owning this is just my assumption, but I've got a lot of experience that backs it up, but also making room for people to be human and not do things perfectly and use less than perfect language, and also for people, both men and women. You've often been the one in a group, not necessarily when you're facilitating, but when you're a participant that does get choked up and starts to talk and can't keep talking because your throat gets tight because you're so moved by something, and that be okay. In fact, we don't paper over that. We just let it be. Or for women who have a lot more, I think, native access to more tender expression of feeling, to especially if somebody's had a loss recently, to just weep and have that be acceptable, and that there isn't one right way to be vulnerable or to express oneself, that there's a multitude of ways. Everybody's got their own, in fact, particularly unique way of expressing themselves. That's who we are as individuals.
We've learned to start to tease apart different levels of this thing that we call feeling or emotion. It's sometimes really helpful to to speak of sensation. What are the sensory messages you're getting from your own body? And then feeling, which is kind of like adding a label to a suite of sensations. Oh, I've got a pounding heart and my muscles feel weak. I must be afraid, fear, that feeling label. But then, but then another level on top of that we call emotion or emotionality, where you start adding all sorts of story to it, all sorts of narrative. I am afraid and I need to run. I am afraid and there's somebody to blame. I am afraid and there's this and I shouldn't be. You're adding all of these extra stories to it. I'm afraid, and because of that, that person needs to go away. When people are suspicious of a workshop where we're calling people together to talk about their lives and be vulnerable, they're suspicious of the emotionality. That's my read on it. Because this is a world in which emotionality has just been pushed and pushed and pushed higher, higher, higher. But underneath that, the levels of feeling and sensation provide us marvelous, truthful, invaluable information
Right.
about who we are, what's going on, how we honestly think, how we honestly feel about something. That's all really needful information.
In some ways, the emotionality strikes fear in the heart of rationally based people, because it just looks so crazy. And there's never space to say, let's quiet down a little bit and find out what that's all about so that we can actually address it rather than just feeling pushed around by it. So that is part of, it would seem, what creates the polarization, right? Because it's emotionality versus hyper rationality
Right.
trying to be in control.
Right.
And it's like neither one by itself. I mean, you don't want rationality without heart.
No.
That's just cold.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want real heart. When I think of a deeply caring, belonging, containing, lovingly containing relationship, there's space to just allow huge emotions to be expressed for a period of time.
The work is we have to learn to tease apart the story from the feeling. If
Right.
emotionality is those things all jumbled up together,
Right.
and we want the feeling because that's useful and valuable,
Yeah.
but the story has to be stripped away and teased apart. Well, isn't that what we do in the office? When a couple comes into the office,
Sure.
they're in their emotionality, blame and victimhood, and
Right.
you're the fault and it's your trouble and whatever. And we have to slowly, as we get to know them, tease apart all of the added story onto what happened and what they need and what they think and how it went and who did what to get to the actual deep feeling underneath.
Right. And the paradoxical reasonableness of that feeling,
Right.
that if you have your hand physically forced onto a hot burner, when somebody grabs your wrist, you're going to have a residual experience. It's understandable. It's rational to freak out if you're close to a hot stove and somebody grabs your wrist. So that's okay, but we have to understand that and then remember, oh, that's a reaction, real,
Right.
but not present. The situation has changed. And there are other ways of doing it than knocking somebody in the face with your hand, and starting to get to the bottom of that and then reestablish some new safety. So all of that's important. And when I think of a loving, belonging community, it means a bunch of people who know they also have those kinds of reactions and can make space as long as they're not being pointed at and blamed. So there may be times during the workshop when somebody really melts down.
Yes.
And may even get either really sad and deeply need to weep, or get really scared and be shaking, or get really angry and be shaking and needing to say what they're so angry about without targeting an individual. And we have ways of helping the group contain that and be a strong container for that.
Right.
And by the time somebody risks that, we're already down the road in terms of the group having bonded and having some trust for the people in the room.
The common wisdom out there is that it's harder for men to get vulnerable for women. But wouldn't you say you've had as much trouble getting in touch with and being vulnerable as I have?
I made a whole video about it.
Right? Yeah.
It's been a real challenge because I came from a family that did not tolerate people needing and having disappointing relationships where it ended up being pretty functional to stop being needy because my needs weren't getting met. So I needed to take responsibility for myself. It was nice to learn I could need things. And a lot of that has transpired in our relationship.
Right.
And you've supported that. It's okay for me to need things from you. One of the things that I talked about in the two videos that I recorded earlier about vulnerability is that vulnerability is inviting people into our deepest selves. And that's really risky.
I like that. I like that definition of that it's inviting people into our deepest selves. So I'm sitting here and we're recording a video that you're going to edit and we're going to put out into the world and other people are going to watch.
Yeah.
And so I'm supposed to show up as smart and knowledgeable and I got it all together and got ready answers for you, but you ask me these questions and the first thing that goes on is, but then I'm sitting here and it's like, look how huge my hand looks and look at the way my face keeps going crazy with my crazy nose and my tics and my hand stuff and I get really self-conscious about all of that. And what do I look at? Do I look at the camera? Do I look at the screen? Do I look at which is the best representation of me? And what am I supposed to do? What do people need? It's just like the amount of extraneous bullshit that goes on in my head while recording a video is just crazy.
Yeah.
So that's the whole truth. I'm smart and I have things I've thought about and I can speak well to many things and I'm also full of all kinds of crap.
Yeah, we're a mess, human beings. We just have all this stuff that goes on inside of us.
And what a relief, though, to just say, I'm a mess.
I'm a mess. I'm a really good mess. I'm a thoughtful mess. I'm pretty smart, but I'm a mess.
Oh.
Yeah, what a relief.
So isn't that one of the key benefits of being vulnerable? You just tell the truth because then you're not putting energy into hiding it,
right,
covering it up, pretending to be something else.
Yeah.
All of this other crap, you just say, yeah, this is me. I'm a mess. Here's how I think. Here's how I feel. Here's how I look. Here's how I act.
Yeah. I've been wrong in the past.
Yeah.
Many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a relief, isn't it? Yeah. It's always a relief for me when I get vulnerable. I need to add, when I get vulnerable with you, because you're extraordinary at not judging me when I get vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really healing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that's part of what we can set up and as we grow during the workshop to a more and more cohesive, thoughtful, safe container, is that it will be safe for people to just be a mess. And we're all brilliant in our own ways and so lovable. That's what I'm looking forward to.
And when you stop hiding and people don't go away, that's true belonging.
When they not only don't go away physically, that's one level,
mm-hmm.
but when they're, in fact, the opposite happens, their hearts open up and they get closer.
Right.
And you can feel it, even if you're not a huggy, touchy person. You can feel people are taking you seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the opposite of wanting to make fun of you.
Right.
They want to care about you.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I have kind of a low bar for true belonging. It's just when people
Stay in the room.
When people don't go storming out of the room in anger.
Or glaze over and go to sleep.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's enough.
All right, let's stop.
All right.